So, before publishing in his adult life two relatively brief but rich essays extolling the virtues of the eccentric fin de siècle avant-gardist Alfred Jarry's theory of pataphysics, and pataphysics as a concept, I'm gonna unpack more fully around page 5. But for now, let me just sort of give you something to stick in your head to sort of float around near the word pataphysics to give you a sort of grounding. And you could sort of begin to think about it as the science of the realm beyond metaphysics, or the science of imaginary solutions. So before publishing, Deleuze had already developed an admiration for Jarry's work, which, according to François Daux's recent biography of Deleuze-Guattari, manifested as early as his high school philosophy courses at Henry IV. And as a side note / interesting little connection, according to Alistair Brokey's recent biography of Jarry, Henry IV was also the school at which Jarry studied with Henri Bergson in 1891. And this is also particularly significant because most literary critics tend to agree that Jarry's encounter with Bergson, which, interestingly, is a connection that Deleuze seems not to have ever made, had a dramatic effect on Jarry and greatly influenced much of his thought, especially the creation of his concept of pataphysics. But to return to young Deleuze, Daux recounts that while studying at that elite Parisian high school, Deleuze took a few courses with Jean Buffet, who was introducing Heidegger's work in France. Fascinated by his master, Buffet, like Heidegger, claimed that one had to speak and think in German to truly understand his work. The following week, Deleuze proposed a sarcastic contradiction, claiming that Alfred Jarry was the French poet who not only understood, but also preceded Heidegger. So, according to Daux, Buffet was unimpressed with young Deleuze's quip, and he promptly asked him to be quiet. Given the two later publications that I mentioned, it seems that Deleuze refused to keep shut his mouth permanently about Jarry. And perhaps most interesting to me about this anecdote is the revelation of Deleuze's interest in the avant-garde and its relationship to philosophy at such an early stage in his intellectual and creative development. Considering his lifelong commitment to various forms of experimentation and his lifelong interest in literature, this connection seems particularly insightful. But at the same time, I find it really strange that Deleuze wrote so little about Jarry, explicitly. Now, implicitly, I think it would be fair to say that Deleuze wrote constantly about Jarry, or that the specter of Jarry haunted Deleuze his entire life, or that Jarry's pataphysical machine repeatedly connected, if covertly, to various of Deleuze's textual machines, from solo projects like The Logic of Sense, where Jarry's absence seems, to me, profoundly conspicuous, to the collaborative projects like What is Philosophy, where it seems sort of deliciously mischievous, but potentially fruitful to insert the concept of pataphysics into D&G's proposal that philosophy is the discipline of creating concepts, in order to consider or reconsider the function of Jarry's theory qua theory rather than theory qua art. This connection between pataphysics and what is philosophy has really been on my mind since recently reading Isabelle Stenger's article, Experimenting with What is Philosophy, where she explores D&G's approach to the relationship between science and philosophy in a really provocative way. Unfortunately, Stenger's never introduces pataphysics into the equation, and to my knowledge, this connection has gone without scholarly attention elsewhere as well. So the possibilities of its effects remain a mystery. As my comments here today endeavor merely to introduce the Deleuze-Jarry connection, I have no intention of solving that mystery, but I would like to suggest that we consider it seriously. I realize that before I go too much longer, I should try to unpack that concept of pataphysics and give it maybe a historical context. To do this, I should first introduce you to the French madman Alfred Jarry, the diminutive, alcohol and absinthe-soaked, ether-huffing friend of the symbolists, who coined the term in his 1893 stage play, Gilles, but really, he began developing it in his notorious 1896 stage play, Ubuwa. Of course, Ubuwa is that crazy play that caused this sort of commotion, and there was a riot, and the guy comes on stage, and the first word is shit, and, you know, it's... Shitter, yeah. And then Jarry basically brought to fruition this idea of pataphysics in his novel, The Exploits and Opinions of Dr. Faustral, Pataphysician, which he wrote in 1901, but it didn't really see the light of day until 4 years after his death in 1911. The significance of these two texts, Ubuwa and Dr. Faustral, coupled with other of Jarry's various dramatic and prose pieces. For instance, he's got a great book called The Super Male. We were talking about earlier. It's this crazy book about sort of coming up with a perfect sex robot that's a Native American robot that's fueled by alcohol, and then he's got he's written
like
this
for Dr. Frankenfurter.
Yeah, like Dr. Frankenfurter. Yeah. And he wrote another piece called "The Crucifixion of Jesus as a Bicycle Race." And he has this really great bit, and Deleuze talks a bit about this other sort of prose piece called "How to Build a Time Machine," which is particularly interesting. And so these pieces, I think, have yielded a host of laudatory, interdisciplinary responses that seem to echo Deleuze's bold claim about Jarry's anticipatory plagiarism, to steal from Gilles, of Heidegger, from theater critics such as Martin Esslin, George Wellworth, and Leonard Pronko, all of whom consider Jarry's work to be this sort of central forerunner of the theater of the absurd, to literary critic Bettina Knapp's assertion that Jarry's work should be viewed as a forerunner in many ways of the ideas proclaimed by the futurists and the cubists, to art critic Jill Fell, who concludes that Jarry should be credited for conceptualizing cubism, to the historian Maurice Nadeau, who claims that Jarry's aesthetics of the absurd actually anticipates existentialism, to the translator and biography Roger Shattuck, who basically throws down and says that Jarry should be credited with originating the avant-garde. And that doesn't even take into account the artistic practitioners who admired and considered as precursor of Jarry's theory of pataphysics, from Breton to Duchamp to Mallarmé and Artaud. I mean, all of these people are sort of, totally sort of vibing with Jarry, and on and on and on. So with this level of admiration, it would seem reasonable to ask, why isn't Jarry a household name like Picasso or Einstein? Deleuze considers him a precursor to Heidegger. Asa Jorn, one of the founding members of the Situationalist International, believed that pataphysics was the religion of the future. Jean Baudrillard considered pataphysics to be the best approach to understanding the problems of contemporary life. I think the answer is that despite the fact that many important thinkers and artists have acknowledged the significance and the relevancy of pataphysics, its premise is often seen as too radical. It's esoteric or unproductively anarchic or intentionally parodic or academically frivolous or just outright nonsensical.